Hello and welcome to Children's Church. We've been going through the New Testament, talking about different spots where Jesus dealt with different subjects. What did Jesus say about something? And in the middle of that, sometimes you run across stories where there's an oddly specific detail that God put in there. And you ever wonder, why that oddly specific detail? What was Jesus trying to say? Our story today deals with an oddly specific detail. The number 10. Why would God point out the number 10? Let's see if you can figure it out. So Jesus and the disciples had been walking along, and they had been up in Galilee, up in the north side of the country of Israel, and they had to go down south to get to Jerusalem. And between Galilee and Jerusalem is this area called Samaria. Now, Samaria is full of people, and they're called Samaritans. And the Samaritans were kind of an interesting bunch. They believed part of the laws and the regulations that the Jews followed, but they also followed part of the Gentile stuff. So they were considered unclean by the Jewish people because they didn't fully worship God correctly. And so they kind of had some mixed up ideas there. And so the Jews and the Samaritans, they didn't like each other very much. And they wouldn't get together. As a matter of fact, Jewish people wouldn't even eat with a Samaritan person. They were considered unclean. Now, Jesus and his disciples were walking right along the border of Galilee and Samaria, so you would see a lot of people who were Jews, and you would also see some people who were Samaritans, and they would just kind of pass along the way and leave each other alone. And Jesus and the disciples were going just about into a city. They were heading into the city, and just before they got in the city, they heard a commotion. And there are these 10 men who are shouting to Jesus, "Jesus, have pity on us!" Why were they doing that? And why weren't they in the city? Why were they outside of the city? Well, these 10 men had leprosy. Leprosy was a horrible disease, and it was very contagious. Nowadays we talk about, something being contagious, and we think about, the cold that's going around that people are all scared of, and so they're wearing face masks so they don't catch it. Well, this disease, leprosy, was just as contagious as the disease that we're talking about today, except for this leprosy disease. Oh, it was horrible, because if you got it, your skin would start to get affected first, and your skin would get kind of rashy and blotchy and awful looking, and then it would get down into your nerves, and so you couldn't feel things. Like you couldn't feel when you went to pick something up, you wouldn't know if you had it in your hand or not. And if you picked up something that was super hot, you wouldn't know, you'd burn your hand. Or if you were cutting, you could cut yourself and you wouldn't even feel it. So you could just imagine what that would do to people's hands. They would get all mangled up and looking horrible. And of course, then the skin would start to smell bad. Ugh. And sometimes it would affect people's faces and ears, and they look like zombies. They just look horrible. And it would get worse and worse and worse until you finally died. And leprosy was so contagious that the law said that if you had leprosy, you had to get out of town and stay away from everyone. And if anyone even got close to you, you had to warn them, get away, I'm a leper, unclean. And then people would go, oh. And the law said that if you didn't warn people, well, you could be put to death. Because think about it, you could infect everyone. So it was a very scary disease. So if somebody had leprosy, they got driven away from their house. They were treated like as if they had actually died. And they had to go out and live in the wilderness. And the only way you could come back is if you somehow got better. And no one really knew any way to do that. So pretty much it was a death sentence, but it was a slow and painful, horrible death. Now, this group, who all had leprosy, were all outside of the city, and they must have thought that if they got together, then maybe Jesus would listen to them and heal them. Because, see, the Jews had a tradition that in order to do public worship or public prayer, you had to have a minyan. Minyan, now it's not like minions, the little yellow creatures. Minyan, it's spelled different, means a group of 10. And so if they were going to publicly pray and there was 9, they would have to wait until a 10th showed up. And so this group had gotten together, this minion, this 10 lepers. And they thought that if they were coming in that magic number, then maybe Jesus would listen and heal them. And so they shouted out, "Have pity on us!" And Jesus turns and looks, and he notices how many there are. And rather than walk over and heal them like he had done with so many other lepers, where Jesus had walked up and touched them, which you're never supposed to do, this group of 10, Jesus just looks and turns and shouts back to them, "Go show yourself to the priest." Now see, if you somehow got better when you were a leper or had some other disease and you didn't seem to have it anymore, you couldn't just go back home. No. You had to show yourself to a priest. And the priest had to look you over and then declare you clean. And then you could go back home. So what Jesus was saying is, go show yourself to the priest. And they looked at themselves and they still looked awful. They still smelled like lepers, but they obeyed. They turned away from Jesus and started walking toward where the priest would be. And as they were going on their way in obedience, the strangest thing happened. One fellow starts to feel his hands. Another one looks down and sees that the rotting skin has been replaced with clean, young skin. Another one looks at his friend and notices that scary face is turning back into the face it used to look like. They were being healed as they walked. And the further they walked, the better they got. And they started getting excited. And they started rejoicing. And they started to run to the priest. But one of them stops. And he turns around. And he ran as fast as he could back to Jesus. And threw himself on the ground in front of Jesus. And just worshiping him and thanking him and thanking him and thanking him. And Jesus looks down at this one guy. And he said, "What's going on? Weren't there 10 of you? Where are the other 9? He said, "None of them can come back and express their gratitude and worship, but just this one. And he is a Samaritan, an outsider, not a Jew." See, what Jesus knew is that the 9 lepers who were Jews couldn't find a 10th one. So they grabbed the only other guy who was there, a Samaritan, figuring that maybe Jesus wouldn't know he was a Samaritan. Jesus knew exactly what they were doing. And he knew this man was a Samaritan. And he knew that the Samaritan knew he was a Samaritan. And Jesus is acknowledging all of it. And he says to him, "Rise up. Your faith has made you whole. Go your way in peace." And the man got up, recognizing that Jesus accepted his worship, just one man, not the magic 10. And he went his way healed. Now, the others were healed too. But they missed out on a special blessing, didn't they? And that's the end of our story. Go back and listen to it one more time. There's interesting details when we read Bible stories that sometimes you can miss if you just read through it really fast. The number 10. Okay, ready for the questions? Question number 1. What pleased you about this story? What did you like? What pleased you? Question number 2 asks, what displeased you about this story? What did you not like? Question number 3 asks, what does this story tell us about people? What people are like? Think about the 9 Jewish lepers who were healed, and think about the one Samaritan who they threw in to make the 10th one. Question number 4 asks, what does this story tell us about God? What God is like? Question number 5 asks, what touched you the most about this story? What meant the most to you? Question number 6 asks, what should I do differently because of this story? Now remember, you got to answer this one. I should something. And question number 7 asks, who should I tell this story to? Now remember, it can't be someone who's just sitting there listening to it with you right now. And it has to be a person. Who should I tell this story to? Well, I look forward to seeing you next week as you join us for another episode of Children's Church.